In this video, we'll discuss the features on Ice Cube's face that point to strength, endurance, and toughness, as well as the highly auspicious mole cluster on his right cheekbone. Enjoy.
In today's video, we're reading the face of Ice Cube, also known as O'Shea Jackson Sr. His son is O'Shea Jackson Jr. If you are new to my face reading channel, welcome, but please go up here and watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video. That'll give you a good overview as to what face reading is. It'll help you understand that this is a branch of Chinese medicine, and there are some terms and terminology that I will likely use in this video that you might be unfamiliar with. So if you're new, please go watch that so you're not lost in your orientation to this video. When I was looking at Ice Cube's face, there were a number of themes that came out right away. And for the record, I've always loved Ice Cube's face. Even before I was a face reader, I've always been drawn to his face. I think he has a very interesting face. He's got very dynamic features, but he has a dominance in 3 elements. Earth being first and foremost. Then he's got some sizable metrics in fire and also in wood. So it's an interesting combination. And there are some things that slightly deviate from traditional theory. That doesn't mean it doesn't have its place, but it's not something you see all the time, nor is it something that I always talk about. So we'll go into all of that. So let's start with the earth dominant features first. For review, when we see earth dominant features, what we're looking for is a plumpness, a suppleness, and a fullness in the features and in the tissues of the skin. The epicenter of the earth element on the face is the mouth. So when we see big, full, dominant lips, a big upper lip, a big lower lip, both being dominant and full, or just one being dominant and full, we still want to pay attention to the earth element rhythms. So the thing to remember is that classically, when we look at the 5-element wheel, it's technically not fully a wheel in the sense that the modern version has all 5 elements moving in a circle with nothing in the center point. So you can think of the classical version as it's still a wheel because the 4 elements flank the central element of earth. And that's the classical representation. So when you overlay a lot of 5-element theory, you want to use both of these. The modern version is a bit easier in terms of understanding the 5-element connections, but the classical symbolism and understanding sort of the universal or divine order structure of things, the bigger, the macro lens, you're going to look at the classical one. So that being said, him being dominant in the earth element, and because the earth element sits at the center of that classical 5-element wheel, there's usually a propensity for the person to have command of the other 4 elements pretty well because all of the elements are birthed from earth. When you have dominant earth, that means, you can sort of dabble and rotate and move through the other elements, even if you're not necessarily dominant in them. So having dominant earth element features is auspicious in Chinese medicine. So he has these full dominant features. The themes that relate to the earth element, we're looking at long-lasting endurance. That can be physical, mental, and spiritual. So if we're thinking about this, that ability to slog and move heavy things, both physical and metaphoric, that's where the earth element shines. The image that comes to mind when I think about the earth element is sort of like a Clydesdale horse, a workhorse of sorts that's able to pull things for a very long period of time, and there's an undercurrent of strength and resiliency. Now, if you look at the body morphology of Ice Cube as well, he's always been kind of a burly, husky guy. He's always carried a little bit of extra earth. He's never been super lean, and maybe there's been phases, but for the most part through his life, he always carries a little bit of extra, and that's not bad. Some people's bodies just naturally carry that. So it doesn't look pathological to me. He just runs with a lot of earth, and his face reflects that. So you can see that in the fullness of the cheeks, the fullness and roundness of his nose, the plumpness throughout the entirety of his face. When you look at him, he's very dominant in earth, and that is something to pay attention to because a lot of times when people hear about earth and plump features and fleshy features, a lot of times people will equate that with being heavy set or fat. And that's not the case. That's not what that means. It just means that plumpness and that fullness relates to the earth element, and therefore these themes are the things that Ice Cube according to face reading theory, that he should be engaging. So I would be asking him about that. I would also be inquiring, if I was in a session with him, about the five senses and stimulation of the five senses and house and home rhythms, what family means to him. When you have earth dominant features, those things are going to be prevalent in the big picture. And if you're not relying on those things a bit more, given those features, life force can get a little out of whack and a little wonky. So that's the earth. Now, where we see the wood element show up on him, where we're going to want to pay attention to this, is in the presentation of his face collectively, the countenance. I have said before in some of my other videos that the ability to look imposing, to look tough, to look aggressive, to look intimidating, those are all wood metrics. The reason for this is that the wood element regulates anger, frustration, and hostility. So you might think, well, if a person looks tough, or they look mean, or they look aggressive, or they look formidable, this is off-putting to many. This is why some people dialogue well with the wood element, some don't. Ice Cube has one of those faces that his face, by default, its natural setting, is going to make some people uncomfortable simply because he looks tough and imposing. Other people are going to like that. There's something about hard edges that people like. Again, as I've said in other videos, I happen to be one of these people. So I've always liked this face. I like wood-featured people. Now, the wood element typically shows up in the dominance of the jawline and the eyebrows. Now, while he has strong eyebrows, but not excessively so, and he doesn't have an excessively cut jaw, where the wood metrics show up for him, which is not always the case, is in that toughness, that ability to look imposing and intimidating. So there's a lot of wood energy coming out of the face. And this brings me to the point when we think about the elements that you have to remember. The elements have an energetic expression and they have a material expression. And a lot of times what we're talking about in face reading is the material expression, the bone structure, the features, the shape, the plumpness, the texture. That's all the material. But then there's the energetics, which is the immaterial side of wood and how it conveys. And that's where his wood metric really shows up, is in the immaterial countenance. The energy that's felt off the face is very strongly wood. With that, things like hostility, aggression, anger are going to be at this person's disposal should they want to use it. Likely it's one of his decompression levers. Some people process and move anger better than others. Some people do better with anxiety, right, or depression. Some people are able to handle those things a bit better. So it's not to say that we all can't learn to navigate these things, but your facial features point you into a direction that says, I carry this, therefore I should pay attention to it, and I likely have some strength and aptitude in this. Now, the way this is regulated in terms of keeping things balanced is through strength training. The engagement of the ligamental tissue, that's really important for wood energetics. You have to use the connective tissue of the body and challenge it and keep that energy moving so that the wood element doesn't get too hot and the frustration and irritability and the things that make you angry in the world, that doesn't become too much of a pressure cooker. You have to engage the element to keep it circulating. So that's the big thing that I would be talking to Ice Cube about in relation to that. Now, where we see the fire, this part is super interesting to me because when we look at fire, we're looking at wrinkling, which he doesn't have a ton of, but we're looking for pointy features. When you look at Ice Cube's face, there are lots of points that show up, a lot of angularity that comes with it. So his eyebrows naturally have some points. There's the check marks this way. His eyes are also long, wide, and they have this kind of squinty, sharp presentation. The eyes are somewhat sharp. His nose has a downward point, implying that point. He's got a lot of things going on in terms of that fire element that show up. And when his face crinkles, okay, like when he frowns or does anything, you can see these triangular formations come to the front line. Now, this is like a highlight feature that is highly auspicious and very lucky. And that is the triangular mole cluster that he has on his right cheek. All of the elements have a shape that associate to it. So we'll go through those very quickly. Fire relates to the triangle. Earth relates to the square. Metal relates to the circle. Water relates to curved lines, so lines that change shape. And then wood is the rectangle. So when we see a shape form on a person's face, especially through the clustering of moles or freckles, This is seen as highly auspicious. The reason for that is symmetry has been revered throughout world traditions since the beginning of time. Symmetry in features, symmetry in nature, repetitive fractal patterns, and typically in nature, straight lines don't typically form. Now you might think, well, Gray, the trunks of trees are straight, right? They're linear, true, but they're not a perfectly straight line. There's still undulation and slight irregularities in the shaping of wood. Now, if you think about metal, you might say, well, metal can be polished to a completely flat surface. True, through augmentation, but most metal comes out as rare precious metals. Lithium, crystals, they come out irregular. And so, again, while there are some linear themes in nature, we typically don't see straight lines. And when you look at his face here, I overlaid a triangle onto it, and you can see this very nicely shaped triangle. That would be called a fire marker. Now, this is like double auspicious, double lucky, because he already carries fire features. He has the triangular tattoo of sorts, a natural like birthmark of sorts of a triangle. He already carries it, and it's on his public persona side, on the right side of the face. So what this means is sort of like a highlight fire marker on the public persona side. So given that he went into show business, that he was an artist, he was a performer, the fire element themes relate to future, fame, and luck and notoriety. That's what it's about. And so to have a fire cluster on the public persona, which relates to future, fame, and luck, how the public sees you, this is like many layers of good luck showing up on his face. It's very, very interesting. And this brings us to the topic of moles. And I haven't talked a lot about this in my face reading videos, but the idea behind moles is that this idea of material formation. So when we have a dominance, like a big nose or a strong cheekbones, there's more material form. And when there's more material form, there's an energetic component that will piggyback along with that material form. Moles and these freckles that show up and that are visually dominant are said to be sort of like this, like a coalescing or a condensing and a matriculation of that energy taking form. So moles sometimes can be unlucky depending on where they are in the face, and that's a big topic I'm not going to get into, but they can also be very lucky depending on where they land on the face. So for him, he's got the fire marker on the right side up near the eye. And in terms of its presentation, if you think of the face as a canvas, if you think of it as a divine tapestry of sorts, even compositionally, where it shows up, it's well placed. There's something aesthetically pleasing about it. And face reading says that's something also to take into account. If he had this marker on the tip of his nose, that would be a little off-putting and almost like something that is too central, too noticeable. This is off-center. And for the people that don't know what composition is, I was an art major. When you have a painting or a picture, I'll use the framing here of the video right here. You'll notice that I don't sit, where is it? Here we go. I'm not right in the center. And while there's something to be said for being frontline and center, when you are off to the side, it creates some negative space over here. Composition is about how your eye moves through a picture. So if you're looking at something, a lot of classical art training will tell you, if the focal point of your painting is a tree, you don't put the tree right in the center. You put it off to the side so the eye has a capacity to move through the picture. So you want your eye to move through the picture, but not get focused in the center. So when we see things off-center in relation to his face, even compositionally from an artistic perspective, that's good. There's something there. So I find that very interesting, and it's something to really pay attention to. He carries that, and I love the way it looks. It looks intentional. It almost looks like a tattoo he put on his face, but it's a natural feature. Now, a couple other things. The styles of luck that we carry: fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. There is an associated style of luck that each of the elements carry. Ice Cube carries something called direct peach luck, which relates to the wood element. And what that means is there's a countenance on the face that is very direct, very blunt, and very penetrating. The nature of wood, like a battering ram, right? Like a log battering, taking down like the castle doors, right? Think of like a log, like when they used to do that in olden times, and they would battering ram their way into a castle. That's the nature of wood. And so when we see that imposing look, it would behoove Ice Cube to play to that, being direct, being blunt, And there's something captivating about that when people do it, when they carry it well, because many of us like that firm edge. And this is the type of person, when you look at Ice Cube's face, what his face says is that with that toughness, not everyone is going to be able to sidle up next to that. But the people that are going to feel really good about it, because when you're able to befriend at least someone that looks very menacing, it's like the idea of befriending a tiger. It's dangerous, but if the tiger's on your side, we like that. Like, yeah, I got someone tough and I have a formidable ally with me. So there's something to be said about that. That luck, and the more he played to that firmness is actually a good thing, and that directness. Now, that being said, the other correlation that I wanted to touch to here was his ratios in relation to Oprah Winfrey. Now, they're not related. I don't believe they're friends or anything, but I do think it's interesting, because when I see correlations between people's face and there's a ratio and symmetry that's congruent, you want to pay attention to this, because we can see some similar life themes. So if you look at their eyes, they're both spaced wide. They have a similar placement of the nose in relation to the eyes and the dominance of the mouth. Now, while they're not twins, you can see this spatial relationship. And in terms of that good luck, open, accessible, when we see big, wide, open features like this is very much indicative of that open accessibility in the public sphere. So the closer set the eyes are and the narrower the face is, this doesn't mean you can't have a good public persona image. What it means is, though, the energy runs internally a bit more. Things are compressed inward a bit more. When things are open, the energy naturally runs out and expands into the world a bit more. And given his life terrain and what I've seen, this is something definitely to pay attention to with Ice Cube. So, again, I could be here a long time. There's a lot going on with his face, but these face readings are just the cream off the top. Private readings are about 75 minutes long, and we dive into a lot of things, but I'm just giving you the highlights here. So if you've got questions, please put them down below. And as always, thanks for your time.